And everybody's like, so are we still in Thanksgiving or is this Christmas? So you know what we're going to do today is we're going to split the difference and we're going to sing Christmas songs. And we're going to have some Thanksgiving, but the sermon is not technically, focused on, I would say, a traditional Christmas focus. So I probably will have successfully made everybody angry by it not being entirely Christmas and it not being entirely not Christmas. So, sorry, guys. The challenges are real when you have these things. All right, well, we are talking about missions, and Lord willing, today we are going to finish out this section. And we're talking about, for some of you, the things I'm going to talk about, you're like, oh, I know all this already. Some of you, maybe this will be the first time you've ever been introduced to these concepts. But what I want to do is I want to talk about how our church does missions. And I want to talk about some of the, I would say, pros and cons of some of the things that we try to do to stay engaged in missions. And definitely it'll be an interesting time of discussion. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we will work our way through the content of what's in front of us. Father, we're so grateful for this opportunity to gather together as a body again. And I pray that our fellowship around the Word will be sweet this morning. And this morning in Sunday school, as we talk about just practically how our church does missions and some of the challenges that we face and also the blessings, I pray that those things would be communicated well and that our church would have a better understanding of the dynamics that are at play when we send missionaries, when we partner with missionaries, and as we think about how to pray for our missionaries and stay engaged with what they're doing. And so we ask for your blessing on this time, and we ask it all in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, we've been, obviously, I want to keep in your mind that when we talk about missions, there are certain things that are very objective, and there are certain things that are very subjective. And the things that we're going to talk about today are subjective, and they're also in the category of this is just how we do it, okay? And some of them, I would have to admit that if I knew a better way, I would probably do it, okay? Especially when we talk about the concept of deputation, and explain that and how churches support missionaries, the amount that they tend to support them at. And then we talk about things like missions trips. Having lived on the field, I've seen it done well, and I've seen it done poorly, and I don't want to sound jaded when I talk about the negatives, and I don't want to sound all rosy when I talk about the positives. I want us to have a very balanced view of this, and so that's kind of where we're starting. So, a theology of mission, Psalm 96, and if you go from Psalm 96, I think that the Great Commission really just expounds in a very practical way the things that we see in Psalm 96. But God commands all people to worship him. We saw, secondly, let me get on here. This command is pressing because God is incomparably great. And then set alongside the greatness of God, we have the emptiness of the false religions of this world. And just because someone is engaged in a false religion doesn't mean that they're worshiping a block of wood or a stone. The fact is that their view of Christ may be an unbiblical view of Christ. Their view of salvation, how someone is reconciled to God, may be an unbiblical view of how they're reconciled to God. Yet they may have areas in their theology that would overlap. We would have agreement in our mindset about certain things. So there are some I'll put the term Christian loosely, where if we want to talk about Trinitarian doctrine, we agree really 100% on how we define Trinitarian doctrine, or as we talk about the nature of Christ's ministry. But then when we talk about how someone is actually reconciled to God, what is faith and what is repentance, and what does it mean that we are saved by grace through faith? Is this an infused grace? Okay, is this an infused righteousness or an imputed righteousness? The way that we define that is going to be huge because it's a watershed issue. So when we talk about idolatry, it's not just what we think of as traditional idolatry. And a command is pressing because he will judge the earth. Okay? And then we got into some areas of a questionnaire that I send out to prospective missionaries. And I'm going to tell you that the pieces that I have here are not things that we have had throughout our church's entire history. In fact, not even the whole time that I have been the pastor of our church have we used this questionnaire. This is a newer thing. And the reason that I put it together is I felt like I get so many missionaries that contact the church. We are limited in how many people we can partner with. And I don't want to waste the time of a missionary who's trying to raise support by having them come to our church, and I'm really not theologically or philosophically on the same page enough to want to have us partner with them. And so what it does is it kind of allows me to understand a little bit where they are. And I will say that some of the things that I've talked about in here, we do support. We're partnered with missionaries that I think theologically we're on the same page, but philosophically, how I would see the best way to do missions, we may not have complete uniformity of viewpoint, but I can work with people that I don't agree with on everything, as long as those areas are not, we would say, fundamental, foundational issues. And so I do need to make that caveat. I'm going to run through all this because we've already gone through it. And I want to get into a last little portion, which we did not get into the last couple of weeks. And here it is. Understanding how our church handles missions. Now, I know that we have some people that are missionaries here, and if I ask the questions, I think they probably could answer all of them. So I'm going to ask some questions here so that I get an idea of maybe your knowledge of these areas. So the first word we're going to talk about is the word deputation. Not deputize, okay? They're different. Deputation. Does anyone know what deputation is? Go ahead. Uh-huh. Okay. Question. How long do you think it generally takes a missionary in our current environment to raise the funds that they believe they need or are required to raise in order to get to the field? Anybody want to guess? Huh? You say 3? What'd you say? 2 years? 4? So let's just say 3 to 5, because that would be what a lot of missions agencies would tell you. It takes about 3 to 5 years. So some people are able to do it in about a year, year and a half, but they're usually able to do that if they have a really good network of churches. They usually can do that if they are going to a part of the world where they don't have to raise as much money to support their family and the work that they're doing. But deputation basically is a season of ministry where a missionary family goes from church to church and they present the work that they believe the Lord has directed them into. And there are a lot of different ways that people go through this. There are some that have the mindset that when you're on deputation, you should spend 8 hours a day calling churches and trying to set up meetings, and you should be in as many churches as you possibly can. So Sunday morning, you're going to be in a church. Sunday night, you're going to be in a different church. Wednesday night, you're going to be in a different church. And you're going to just take any meeting that you can get. That is definitely one of the ways that people do it. That's not the way I did it. The way that I did it was that I took a list of pastors that I knew personally, or pastors that were pastoring churches where I knew people personally in those churches, and I just made a list of all of them, and then I categorized them based on how well I knew the people in those places, and I contacted people that I knew the best first, and that's how I did it. But the truth is that it really depends on your church. How well known is your pastor? Where did you go to Bible college? Were you a student that interacted with a lot of people, or were you a little bit more reserved and quiet? Did you go into missions after you'd been working for 10 years and missions wasn't on your radar, and then the Lord began to burden your heart? Those are things that actually really make a difference. Does your sending church get behind you? If your sending church gives you $50 a month, then they don't even give you enough to fill up a tank of gas to drive for a couple of days. Our church didn't do that. Our church started with 20% off the top. Boom. So Josh Moore, we support him at 20% of his total monthly support, and 10% is out of our missions giving, and 10% is out of our general fund. And you know what that did? That gave Josh a tremendous help. And another thing is, if you are sent out of a church where you have a lot of connections, I would say older pastors have lots of connections, but they have fewer quality connections for someone trying to get to the field. And the reason is because usually their churches are peaking when they're older. And what ends up happening is they're not able to take on missionaries as much. Whereas younger pastors who you kind of know them and they know you, they're starting churches, their churches are beginning to grow because they are, in that stage of ministry. A lot of times it's very helpful. But there's not a total, absolute on that kind of thing. But that's just kind of my viewpoint on that. And then another thing is, we took the approach that because these were churches that we knew, these were pastors that we knew, we would go there for the week. And we would be there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night if we could. And we really appreciate it when missionaries are willing to do that with us, and some are and some are not. But deputation is an area of a lot of debate amongst the independent Baptist world, because it's possible that a very good missions candidate may take 3, 4, 5 years to get to the field, and that can be extremely discouraging for that family. And also a lot of it kind of depends on what they're doing. There are some types of work that people get much more excited about than others. So deputation. Go ahead. Yep. There's different ways. So my encouragement to someone who wants to go into missions is that they work during the week and they travel on the weekends until they have enough money to support themselves. But that would depend on the nature of the job they're doing. Like, for instance, when I worked with Frank, I worked with Frank quite a bit of the time we were on deputation. And so we'd drive to New Jersey on Friday or Friday night, Saturday morning, and we'd drive to West Virginia, we'd drive to Virginia, we'd drive to Western Maryland. A lot of the places were, say, 2 hours or less away, and we were able to do that. But that doesn't work for everybody. It depends on the kind of work that they're doing, how flexible their employers are. But really what ends up happening is at some point, you're going to have to step out and you're going to have to tighten your belt, and it's going to be a bit challenging. But yeah, that's why if someone wants to go on the mission field and they already have debt, and I'm their pastor, I'm going to tell them I not get behind them. Because if somebody wants to go on the mission field and they have debt, I would not get behind them, because they're going to put a tremendous financial burden on themselves. But that's a me thing. There are lots of pastors that would never even ask that question. But it is going to be a challenge when you do that, because at some point you're going to have a really tight finances, and you may go to 20 churches and they say, we're going to take you on, but that doesn't mean that they took you on. And they may say, we'll take you on when you're at 50%. We'll take you on when you're at the field. So there's lots and lots of different scenarios. Some churches will vote on you the night you're there. And others, they'll not say a word to you, and you'll hear back from them a year later. Okay, so there's not a uniform, this is how it always works. But in my view, if someone has the ability to work to offset some of those things, that helps. But there's also a side where you get love offerings. And so when you travel to a church, they will give you a love offering, more than likely. That would be an expected thing, and probably going to be a couple $100. And if you're traveling, your travel expenses are completely, you can write them off from taxing standpoint, depending on how your mission board handles your funds, or your sending church handles your funds, if whatever the situation. you actually will get reimbursed sometimes for your travel expenses. So there are ways to do it. And, if somebody's in that situation, we can have a long conversation about what's advisable. A lot of it depends on their financial situation. And that's why as a church, if we're sending somebody out, we start them at 20%. We're giving them a pretty good chunk to get started. And people, when they see that investment from their sending church, they know that you really are serious about this missionary. There was something over here? Okay. All right. Let's keep going. What is a mission board and what is its role? Now, this is actually, you may not realize this, but this is actually a very hotly debated topic amongst Baptists, and there's kind of two mindsets that are out there. One is that a mission board is an absolute essential, and if you don't have a mission board, we don't trust you, because that is a level of accountability that is very, very important. It's going to help you get established on the field. And the other thinking is that a mission board is not out of the local church. It's not of the local church. And so it's a level of authority that is unnecessary. It's inappropriate, and you shouldn't support missionaries who are using a mission board. And I had pastors that I was friends with who would not have me in to do a meeting because we had a mission board. And then I had people that if I did not have a mission board, they would not have had me in. And really it comes down to how militant and inflexible is the person's view of the local church and parachurch organizations. Go ahead. Correct. So what I'm saying is that the church will function as the one who sends your checks. And by the way, a church can do this. There's no question that a church can do this. And then there are agencies like Missionary Clearinghouse, which handles the checks for some people who are out of local churches. But the idea is, who is the missionary ultimately accountable to? Are they accountable to the board first? Are they accountable to the local church first? Or are they accountable to the local church only? Okay? And so what I did is I found middle ground. I was working with a mission board that was out of a local church, and it kind of was a hybrid. And I really liked it because it really did help us in a lot of ways. We went to candidate school, and we went through a lot of process, got a lot of information. Our missions director came and visited us multiple times on the field. Yet on the other side, it was out of a local church, and it was very deferential to our sending church, our sending pastor, and also to the congregations that we were partnered with. Yeah.
So the board wasn't from the same church that you're sending?
No, it wasn't. No, it was not. No. Yeah, go ahead.
It seems like a lot of practices, and so.
Well, it's actually, how do you practically work within the context you're given?
Yeah.
Pragmatism would be if I'm doing something that really violates Scripture, and I don't care because it works.
So,
Yeah.
Seems to be that maybe it might be, seems to make more sense and maybe be even more biblical that if you're going to have a sending church who's sending out a missionary, that they ought to just put their money where their mouth is and support that missionary.
And some do that, Frank. They do that. There are churches that do that, or there are churches that they have a network of very close associated churches, and maybe 3 to 5 churches will be the ones who support them. And that's a great model. But what it will do is it will limit how many missionaries you can be involved in their situation. So, for instance, we have about 15-ish missionaries that we're supporting. If we were to take that model, we could only support Josh Moore. He'd be the only one that we could support. They could do the same thing. Yeah. But what would end up happening is churches that are not healthy enough to send out missionaries, which is a lot of them, unfortunately, they will not have a missions program in that situation. Yeah, go ahead.
It's like diversifying portfolio. If you only have one organization that's supporting you and that organization is suffering and doesn't have financial ability, you just completely lock that missionary. Where if you have multiple churches, multiple individuals supporting this missionary, you lose one or two, hopefully you can pick up one or two other places that gives you more flexibility with your.
And if somebody's on the field for say 30 years, a lot of churches are going to have pastoral transitions multiple times in that 30 years. And every pastor coming into that church is not going to think the same way about that issue. And some pastors, when they come in, they're very motivated to change everything. Okay? They got their missions, they do everything different. They will actually kind of almost put their missionaries on standby, and they will get to know them, and they may cut half of them. It's not unusual at all that kind of a thing will happen. We had a church that supported us that had, I think, 4 pastoral transitions in the time that we were there. It's not good. So, yeah, it can happen. It's interesting how that works. But does the Bible really tell us how to do this? The answer is no, it does not. I mean, Paul did not have one way that he was supported. He did have churches that supported him. There were times that a church primarily supported him, and there were times that he worked with his hands as a tent maker, and he supported himself and the people that were part of his team. So seeing that that's the case, what it tells me is there is flexibility on how we look at that issue. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, that's really good. The truth is that if we never had missionaries present in our church, then the only thing we would think about is Anne Arundel County. If we even think about Anne Arundel County, it's just the honest truth. But when we have missionaries in regularly, when you sit down at a table, you have lunch with a missionary, your kids get to interact with them, it's really impactful. A lot of people that go to the mission field will go because they were exposed to missions in like a Sunday school class when they were like 7. Their family hosted missionary families. Their kids became pen pals. Like these are the kinds of things that often are very influential in people going to the mission field. Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Or when you for the people and the needs to do on that side of the baby or probably being impacted for.
Yeah.
How is that reaching?
Absolutely. That's true. And we've had missionaries that when really bad things happen in their country, I got on Zoom with them, like within a day or two of that. And Zoom, WhatsApp, Signal, Facebook Messenger, not WeChat. So, yes. But anyway, we could go a lot further on this. Let's keep moving, though. What is a typical support level for missionaries? This kind of fluctuates, but I'm just going to give you what my anecdotal evidence here. I would say that on the low side, some churches support between $50 and $100 a month. On the higher side, churches are between $300 and $500. Okay, and that's very anecdotal, but there definitely are churches that still support at $50, $75, and there are definitely churches that are in the $500-$600 range. Okay, we have missionaries that we support at that level. Actually, we have missionaries we support above that level, if you include Josh, a missionary. Okay, and then when you talk about what does it cost to live on the field, I mean, that's like asking the difference between what does it cost to live in rural Mississippi versus California, all right, or Anne Arundel County, or Montgomery County. Let's put that one in there, okay, or rural Indiana or somewhere like that. the truth is that the cost of living is different in all over the world. And so if you're going into a developing country, there might be missionaries that are in the $4,000 or $5,000 a month range. If you're going into more of a European country, that would be more the way that we live here. It may actually be more expensive to live there than it is here. And so it would not be unusual for there to be $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month. And you also have to realize that when you're talking about missionary support, you're not just talking about the salary of the family, okay? You're talking about the travel expenses. If they're in a situation where they have to set up an organization, they may have to financially support that organization. They may be required by the country that they're in to have people that they employ. And that's a delicate situation. They're going to have to pay to stay in the country. You can't just cross the border illegally in a lot of these countries without being deported. Our country is not even close to as draconian as most of the countries we send missionaries to. And you will be spending thousands of dollars a year just to stay in the country. Every time you have to renew a visa, there are complications. Sometimes you have to leave the country. Sometimes they approve one person's, but not another person's. Sometimes they approve parents, but not kids. There's a lot that is going on there. And so we have to keep in mind that we're not just saying, oh, this person lives off of $8,000 a month. It may be that they're living off of $6,500 a month, and $1,500 is going into a reserve account that's going into missions funds or something like that. And if they have a mission board, that board will often set the amount, and that will not be super flexible, okay? So that's just something. Yes, go ahead. Yeah. And it can go two ways. So it could go that the dollar strengthens or it weakens. So like when we lived in Ghana, it was 1.5. Now it's 13-1. So the buying power of the dollar is exponentially strengthened. However, that doesn't mean that you could just buy anything with that. I mean, everything goes up in price. So, you know, a tank of gas is going to cost $4 a gallon, no matter what the exchange rate is in a country like Ghana, okay? When it comes to a lot of things that you buy, when it comes to you getting your housing secured, and people know that you're an American, you have US dollars, and it's really not safe for you to have your house in certain areas, they may say, hey, we're gonna raise up your rate this year, and you're sitting there going, whoo, that's a lot, you know? If you want to buy a vehicle, the question is, do you buy it in the country and roll the dice not knowing what that car really is? Or are you going to buy it in the States and you're going to ship it to the country and you're going to get extorted in the port, and then you're going to have to go through the whole legal process of getting the vehicle registered and all those things? How are you going to drive in the country? Believe it or not, when I lived overseas, I used an international driver's license, and then at some point couldn't do that anymore. And I basically had to drive around with a learner's permit. It was, you know, it's funny, but it's true. So anyway, all right, you go ahead. I'll get Matt.
So just a quick, mission boards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I grew up in the setting of a mission organization, right?
Yep. Yep.
Are there independent Baptist mission organizations that are of similar
Yeah.
size?
Absolutely. Yeah, BIMI, ABWE, Baptist World Mission, Baptist Mid Mission. There's a lot of, yeah, absolutely. Now, the truth is that, you know, organizations do change over time. So, yeah, the landscape changes over, you know, 20, 30-year period. The church landscape changes. Those things all change, but those are all missions agencies that would. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of times they split, and then you get two boards because one section within the group doesn't like where it's going. Like if you were to look at the Southern Baptist model, International Mission Board, okay, that is like a massive organization, and churches send to it, and they don't do deputation. They just they vet the people that apply, and then they're sent out with that. But then there's not a lot of local church interaction. It's a different model, and it makes it easy to get people on the field, but it has great limitations. And then also, when you have the larger an organization is, the more diverse it becomes. And when we're talking about theology, all of a sudden you start getting these issues that they're like theological watersheds. And you can argue whether they should or shouldn't be, but there are going to be ones like that. And then what ends up happening is you have within the organization factions. And so the larger it gets, the more money it needs to feed the beast, and the more watered down it becomes, and the more potentially contentious over those issues. So, if you could look at a 100-year period, you're going to see lots of ups and downs and splits and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Did you have one? Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great question. So our missions agency, what they did is they asked us to budget, and then they would look at our budget and they would advise us on whether or not it looked reasonable. And I will tell you that I am much more inclined to minimalism on those kinds of things. And they would be like, you need to put more there, more here, and that's just the way that I tend to think. And some people, some missionaries literally live on nothing, and there are others who they actually live quite well. And so it's an interesting world out there, and the accountability sometimes is really good, and sometimes it's not. So. Yes. And it was very common in the 70s and the 80s for pastors and missionaries to not take Social Security, not contribute to Social Security. And a lot of people didn't realize it's actually, you're a conscientious objector when you do that as a minister, and you can't change that once it's established. And what ends up happening, you can do it one time, and it's during a grace period. Yeah, but it's got to be conscientious, and but that's another story. Yeah, but I would just say, as a general rule, once you declare what you're going to do, you can't really change it without a lot of problems. And if you fudge on it down the road, you will get crushed by the IRS. So anyway, that's off topic. Yeah, go ahead.
Because the dollar went from 1.3 euros to like 0.85 euros in the matter of a couple months. And ended up having to spend $14,000 for this thing that I could have bought for $8,000 a couple months earlier. And it seems to be stuff like that. I mean, you could take
It affects things massively. Yes, it definitely. Yeah, it can be a big thing, and you do need to understand finance, I think, as a missionary on some level, and the exchange rate, as long as the dollar is in the strengthened position that it is right now, and I know we as Americans don't think it's strong, but we're looking at it in light of the rest of the currencies of the world. Okay, it is still the world currency. The dollar. It's not the pound and not the euro, it's the dollar. And so as long as the dollar is in that position, it gives missionaries, it helps them a lot. And so if someone was to if a developing country sends out missionaries and they're getting financial support in their local currency, that's very, very hard. And it can happen, but it is pretty hard. And so, yeah. All right. I'll take that one right there. This is live stream, so don't use names, please. I'm sorry. They might not have heard that. Don't worry about it. You're good. I didn't hear you again. That's true. Yeah, the thing that you learn is when things are challenging in the world, God has ways of getting the gospel to places, and yeah, you never know, but you can't strategize it. You work with what you're given. But people that are motivated and have a heart to do it, they will find ways to get where the gospel needs to go. And I've just seen that so many times. But yeah, good questions. All right, let's keep moving. How do we vet and partner with missionaries? Usually they reach out to us. I am now sending them a questionnaire. The best candidates will be invited for our missions month in October. When I say the best candidate, I don't want you to get the impression that I think if we don't invite someone, I think they're a bad candidate. We have limited space, and we want to even have our own missionaries who are stateside. We want them to come if possible. So there might be years that we don't have any new missionaries come in, or we might just have one or two. But then if someone comes and we are impressed with them, and I say we, these will be internal discussions within the staff, have conversations with the deacons. I'll often reach out to people in the church that I know are fairly engaged in missions to kind of get an idea of what they think. And if I feel like we have a good candidate, then you'll hear their name come up in a business meeting, okay? And we'll vote on them. So just know that that's kind of what we do there. What should we expect from them? We would expect a missionary to send out at least a quarterly report. When I say quarterly, that's every 3 months. That's not much to ask for. I would like them to be responsive when we reach out to them. And I would say for the most part, our missionaries are. Now, we have an example of one that's not, and you're going to hear about that in our next business meeting. Okay? Because we probably are going to drop a missionary, which I've almost never done. Actually, I've not done that in the time we've been here. But if people are just not responsive and we are really getting behind them, to me, it's kind of rude, disrespectful. And we're not just talking like we send them an email and just kind of, no, we're talking about we've tried calling, we tried emailing, we tried multiple, reach out to the missions agency. So we do expect them to communicate with us. And I would say missionaries that really have had a great experience in our church, they reach out to me and we have dialogue far more than, every quarter, okay? And there'll be some days I'll have an hour to 2 hour conversation with a missionary because we discuss things that are going on the field. And I love that. That's what we want, okay? When they're in the States, we would like them to come by. But I'm not militant about it. I try to be reasonable. But because of our proximity to international airports, we often are a place that people can come to at some point when they're stateside. And that's really, really good. Okay? Well, that's the next question. That's the next question. How do we get involved? I'm going to tell you that this question is actually harder than you realize. Okay? For instance, missions trips. I love missions trips. I've been on multiple missions trips. But if we don't think through a missions trip carefully, we actually really hurt the missionary. There are cultural things that we could do that could devastate them for a long time. When we send people over, they're not experts. None of them are experts, including the pastors that go on the trips. They're not experts, okay? Some pastors are very overbearing when they go to a field, and they expect you to do things the way they want them done, and you know full well that that's going to create problems for you. And so missions trips can be very dicey. And I'm going to mention pros, I'm going to mention cons. First of all, the exposure of being on a foreign field is invaluable for not just a young person, an older person, okay? To realize that there are people that actually live in houses that do not have indoor plumbing. They bath at a public bathhouse. They go to the bathroom in a bucket and they take it out in the woods when they're done. There's lots of people that live in the world like that. And they don't complain about it. That's life for them. And when an American goes and looks at that, they go, this is shocking. They're not shocked by it at all. That is their life. It's the way they live. There are lots of Americans that feel like, you know, I'm entitled to, and they have all this list of stuff that God just has to give them, and they don't seem to realize that the rest of the world doesn't live that way. And so that exposure is absolutely invaluable. But you know, a missionary who is going to plant themselves for decades on a field, who is going through training to go there and learning the language and learning the culture, will make terrible mistakes culturally in the time that they're there. And it's not even just the early days. Sometimes you've been on the field for a while and you make terrible social blunders. And thankfully, when you've been there a while and you've suffered and people know that you've suffered and they know that you love them and those things, they're a little bit more forgiving of you in those situations. But this is very, very complicated. Or sending a care package is a great thing. But you realize that when that care package arrives, they're going to pay to get those things. And if we send them junk, they're paying money to get junk, okay? So we may spend $300 to send a package that's going to cost them $100 to clear because they're getting extorted. And when they open it up, it's junk. So what I'm saying is, I think care packages are great and I encourage it, but we have to think it through. And I think mission trips are great, but we've got to think them through. And just because someone wants to go to a foreign field and see what it's like doesn't mean we should send them. And I would say one of the greatest exposures is when someone goes and they stay with a family for a period of time and they just live with them. And they're not a burden financially to the family. They're not there to tell them how to run their family life and how to run their ministry. They're there to learn and serve. And when people do that, that is really invaluable. And so if I have a young person that says, man, I think I'm called to missions, I'm going to think about the best missionary candidate we have, and I'm going to try to connect them, and I'm going to encourage them to do that. And so I'm very cautious about how we do some of these things. And the reason is because I've seen them go very, very badly. And, you know, it's like, I'll give you just a simple example that nobody would think twice about here. You know, a lot of times when we have a missions presentation, we put them online, and, you know, a person goes on the field and they take pictures of poor people, okay? Someone that's panhandling, someone that's in the market selling something, it doesn't look very sanitary. And they're like, wow, we should really have compassion on these people. And they put that presentation together, and it really is very emotionally stimulating, stirs our hearts, and it's on the live stream. And somebody from that country watches that video, and they are furious that an American would so dishonor them. I really didn't think twice about it. But let me tell you, I experienced that firsthand. Okay? And so the fact is, there's a reason that I don't live stream our missions Q&As. There's a reason I don't live stream our video presentations. It's because if you really want to have a candid conversation, it can't be online. I just put it that way. And the truth is that you can say things very candidly that you don't mean them to be demeaning at all. You genuinely love the people that you're working with, but you have to speak honestly and objectively about what you have witnessed and about the needs that are there. And so these are very delicate issues, very, very delicate issues. And when people go on missions trips, sometimes they'll go, yeah, I'll get you in a second. You know, they'll send out, candy, and they'll give people money, and then they leave, and then the missionary knock on the door, hey, where's my candy today? Oh, I don't have any candy. What do you mean you don't have any candy? This kid that you had with you, man, they gave us all candy, and the whole village is up in an uproar because we got this candy. Or, I got $5 for this and $5 for that. And why won't you help me? You don't love me. You don't care about me. You want to be a help to me. And it's very complicated. So these issues, they take a lot of prayer, a lot of wisdom, and they take people going on a trip who just want to learn. They want to observe. They're only going to minister to the extent that they're asked to, because the missionary recognizes, yeah, you could be invaluable in this particular area or that particular area. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. That's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just have comments. I think the way we do missions here at Bangor is great. Church I go to down in Florida now, they may have 30 or 50 missionaries, but never gets them to all the people.
Yeah.
Impossible. Like, great.
You know their faces, everything. Yeah. Yeah. And not only that, those missionaries really appreciate that connection. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. It's not my job as a pastor to tell people how to use their money. I would say that um, there are many situations where when a church takes on a missionary, you are taking on a missionary with a consensus of thought. In other words, there are people that when they will come here, there's about 15 to 20 people they really connect with, and there's about 50 or 20 people that do not want to support them. Because they're personalities, okay? Yeah, missionaries are very strong people sometimes, very ambitious, very aggressive. They can come across very rudely because of the culture that they're in. And some people will be very offended because of their directness. And then others they will love that. They will say, man, I like this family. And so as a pastor, I sometimes sit down and I'm like, you know what? I like them, but I understand the heartburn people have. And I get this conflict in my heart. And in those situations, I think, sometimes we had individuals that support us when we were on the field, and they're very faithful, and they're very dear families. And I know there's families that do that. And it's not my place to tell people you can or can't do that. I can say that if somebody wants my advice about it, like, what do you think about this missionary? I'd be glad to have a conversation like that. But when you're dealing with a church partnership, you're thinking long-term, you're thinking the body that you pastor. So even I personally might have a guy that I really like, but I know that it really wouldn't work with our church. And so I'm not going to push that. Okay. Or maybe the church really wants to get behind something. I'm not talking about things that are like crossing biblical boundaries. These are very preferential matters, where I may say, to me, maybe not the strongest candidate, but I can get behind that. And I can encourage our church to get behind that individual. I think that they'll grow, things like that. There's judgment calls, and they're a little tough. Yeah. Go ahead. How should we? I would say that when our church is going to take a decision about a missionary, or we're going to take a decision about doing a missions trip, we're going to take a decision about getting behind a humanitarian effort, that will not be something that was decided on a whim, but that'll be something that I thought about, that I talked to men who I believe have wisdom, and that we have vetted it. And so I would encourage the church in those situations to just get behind those things. But I hope that makes sense. But, huh?
It just seems.
No, it's,
like
okay.
Like that's more selfish. Like, oh, I'm gonna do this, but whether maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe that's not going to be helpful.
Well, I would say set aside on a monthly basis a missions commitment. Not that you tell me or you tell the church, but that you regularly do it. And you look at our missions giving and you ask the question, are we doing well? Am I contributing in a way that I should? Because there's a collective element there. So. All right. I'm going to have to stop there because of the time, and I'm just going to call it quits on that one. But I was going to talk about supporting national pastors, pros and cons, and that would be a very interesting discussion. But I will leave that one alone because of time. Sorry. That might have been the most interesting of all of them. But let me make this one statement before we close in prayer. The way that we do missions in our church is that missions is a designated fund. So when we come to our December meeting and we have our annual budget, you're going to see a number that is missions, and you're going to see a number that is general fund, and then you're going to see a number that is total commitment, okay? And if you want to be contributing to missions, you have to designate a portion of your giving to missions. Now, there is an exception. If our church falls behind, we're going to pay our missionaries, okay? And so if you don't designate to missions and we fall behind, you are giving to missions to make up the shortfall. But I would encourage you, and when it comes to taking on new missionaries, one of the things that I look at is, do I feel that our church can really take on this family and take on this commitment long term? And so we're taking them on usually in the $300 to $500 a month range. And so, you're talking about a commitment of about $6,000, $7,000 over the year. And that's a pretty decent amount of money when you're talking about your church. And so, to put it in perspective, you start doing the math. If you give $100 a month, how many people does it take to do that? It's going to take five people giving $100 to take on a new missionary, or it's going to take 10 people at $250, or not $250, $50. We do. Usually Christmas gift is something that we just do because we had a good financial year and we do it. And even if we didn't have a good financial year, if it's not terrible, we'll probably do it too a lot of times. But that won't be out of our missions budget necessarily. We'll just take it out of our checking account. So yeah, we do try to give them a double check around Christmas, New Year's to just be a blessing. So, all right, let's close in prayer. I went long. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to discuss these things. Help our church to have a heart for missions and to be very intentional in this area. Help us to love the people that we're partnered with. Help us to pray for them. Help us to be very kind to them. Help us to put ourselves in their shoes and think about their burdens and their needs, and help us to carry those burdens as we come to you in prayer. And bless our service. May it be very sweet and Christ-centered, and we ask it all in Christ's name. Amen.